Hey guys, welcome back to Hyrule Park, where I am building a theme park based on The Legend of Zelda and Planet Coaster 2. In this video, we're getting the Forest Temple Dark Ride that we started in the last one, all finalized and ready to ride, and man, oh man, guys, this is a process for sure. I mentioned in the last one I was going to leave open the possibility that I'd need to rework some of the track layout, and I did, but that was the least of it. The amount of trial and error that went into making these animatronics that I ended up building, the twisted hallway being a thing, it was a lot, but it was a ton of fun. I'm not going to complain, but yeah, it was something where I wanted to and planned to have this video out last week, and it just wasn't possible to get it all done and then everything edited and put together in that time frame. So yeah. And you may also notice that this is a long ass episode. But yeah, I wanted to make sure I got everything in here and showed as much as possible of the process without being too redundant, of course. But yeah, I wanted to make sure I showed some tricks and techniques that I used to give other people ideas. And yeah, disclaimer with some of the footage and how it may appear out of sequence at times. I tried to edit this so that each section of the video is focusing on one section of the ride. You know, like finishing off a section before moving on in terms of the video viewing experience, so that I didn't, jump back and forth from working on one section, then going to another room before finishing that first one, then coming back later in the video to finish that first room, that sort of thing I was trying to avoid. So yeah, I tried to keep things in order in terms of like viewing experience, but the way I built it was very much like a little bit in this room, go to the next room, work on that to get a break from whatever I was just working on and let it breathe for a bit. I did a lot of jumping around in the building process, but in terms of this video, I tried to keep it as seamless as I could. But yeah, if you do see any discrepancies in the footage in terms of like, oh, that was not built 2 seconds ago when I just saw it, but now it is, that's probably why. And as always, timestamps are in the description, so if you do want to jump around to different rooms and theming sections of the ride, that's in there for you. But before you do that, don't go anywhere. I gotta ask you to subscribe and leave a like, please, and a comment, or both for me. That would mean a lot. Anyways, let's jump in and talk about this dark ride. By far the easiest of these rooms on the ride was this first one here. I knew in advance that I was going to have this as sort of like the opener type deal. This scene from Ocarina where the Skull Kid is doing his thing on the log, and I didn't make Link because the idea is sort of you are Link as the rider of the ride, but also making a Link statue in this game or animatronic was just not working out at all. So that storyline also sort of just conveniently works for the logistics part of it, if I'm being honest. But yeah, this was a scene that I was gonna try to replicate more or less one-to-one from the game. So I had a template going in, which was nice. The only other one in this dark ride is the next section that'll show, that main lobby area. Weird to refer to anything in a ruined temple with ghosts as being a lobby, but that main area in the Forest Temple where the 4 flames and the elevator, that one will also be sort of a one-to-one for the most part, but it was a lot more involved in terms of like the animations and triggers that went into that room, which again I'll show next. So this one here was pretty straightforward. I had already created this Skull Kid animatronic a while back last year, so I was able to just pull from that blueprint that I had already created, and then the rest was just a lot of general theming, so it went pretty quick comparatively speaking. A lot of the stuff I'm doing here is a play on some of the other things and other theming aspects I did in this Lost Woods area in general, so that was a huge plus. I feel like as you get towards the tail end or at least a good chunk into a specific area of your park, you've kind of already done testing and color schemes and explored what pieces will fit in the first couple projects in that area. So yeah, for me, with a goal of trying to really immerse the guest in this specific area of the Lost Woods, so using similar if not the same pieces that I used previous in the Lost Woods, like with the Deku Tree and Kokiri Forest and that sort of thing, and then using similar color schemes kind of makes the process go a lot quicker, which is nice. The only sort of struggle I had with this room was this part here, the roof. I wanted it to be sort of like a forest canopy lighting sort of situation, but I didn't want to have obviously a million trees cluttering this main scene to create that canopy overhead. That just wouldn't work. And I also wanted to leave it sort of open air, so I didn't want to like cap it with the ceiling and use lighting, like artificial lighting. So what I did was I took the idea I used in the Deku Tree restaurant build with these vines as sort of like a canopy rooftop. So it darkens the space a bit, creates that sort of like through the canopy lighting effect I was hoping for. All right, the main room of the Forest Temple, here we go. This is where it starts to get interesting in terms of like how I was going to make this all work. I pretty quickly realized it was going to be a lot more involved in terms of like the scaling of each room and some trial and error there, you know, more so than I had expected going in. Like I knew it was going to be a tough build in terms of planning these things out, but it kind of ended up being a bit more involved than I thought. And like I said, I really didn't have an idea of how to go about building any of these rooms outside of this one and then the Skull Kid scene. So I didn't want to make this room too massive, but also at the same time, I wanted to have this room really pull off the Forest Temple version, so it gets the ride started on the right foot and you for sure know where you're at, if you've played Ocarina, that is. So I needed to have all of the elements that, at least for me, make it a memorable area of the game. So the things that have been ingrained in my head from playing as a kid was like that centerpiece elevator part that I started the room with, and then these like 3 staircase type sections. So that's really what I was focusing on to get the room feeling like I wanted it to, and get kind of the size of the room that I wanted to be able to pull that off. And you probably saw I deleted the track I had originally laid out here because I knew it wasn't going to make for a good ride experience to be able to interact with and experience the room I was building and wanted to build. So what I figured I'd do was delete the track section where this room was theoretically going to be, build out the room, or at least like the skeleton of the room, then that way I knew where the main focus points would be. Then I can redo the track, you know, through the room at that point more intentionally. And you know, I edit the track layout that I had originally laid down in the last episode. I edit that throughout, but this is really the biggest flow change. It's not even that huge of a flow change, really. It's more just making it a slightly more circuitous route through this room to be able to put in like the Poe sisters animatronic thing, the elevator, and have the room be like the biggest in terms of footprint, so that it really drives home that this is like the main lobby, as I had strangely referred to it as earlier. And don't mind the colors of like the elevator in particular too much, and then maybe some of the pillars later on. I do go back and recolor those because I just wanted at first to ballpark the color, and then once I got more details in, I was able to get the color dialed in a bit more to, you know, the weathered old type look that I was going for, rather than this like blatant like yellow color I started with on the elevator. In terms of the build process with this room, a lot of it was sort of copy and pasting things as I built and moving them into similar sections of the room, if that makes sense. Like for instance, the staircase and the railings and whatnot, that was easy to build how I wanted it just once, and then copy and drag it over to the other stairs in the room and adjust, you know, things like the balusters, the railings, and line it up to fit the spot. That's probably an obvious technique, but it's worth pointing out, like you don't have to totally reinvent the wheel with each piece you make in a room or a ride, you know? Give yourself a break and just copy and paste when you can. I'd say the most difficult aspect of this part of this room, and really it plays into every room in this dark ride, was the angles and getting those right and not looking too overly wonky. The good thing is, you know, this is a dark ride, right? So by nature it's gonna be, well, dark. So some of the blemishes you just flat out won't be able to see, and then the ones that are more obvious and that really just are not cooperating, I'm able to cover up with like vines and foliage that I'm adding to the walls for more textures and whatnot. But yeah, I did wonder this entire time as well, like how in the world am I gonna create a ceiling that makes everything look cohesive from room to room? And that wasn't so much the problem, I eventually found out. It was more the building shell and the roof specifically that gave me nightmares, because and I'll show a snippet of the cluster it just ended up being when the ride is more or less complete towards the end of the video, you know, before I put the custom roof on. But yeah, it was just something I had to for sure clean up or hide with a roof, because that again was just a super convoluted mess up there after everything was created. I'll throw a screenshot up now, by the way, of the room for any non-Zelda fans that aren't familiar with what I'm replicating in this room. But you know, you'll see in the image like the staircases I'm referring to. I don't know, this room is just sort of an iconic room for me in my childhood, and it wasn't too bad to replicate either. That is until we get to the triggers and the animatronic piece of the puzzle. The thing I really needed to figure out, though, I sort of mentioned it a minute ago, was how I was going to make this interesting to traverse through, like with the on-ride experience, right? At first, I really just had the track going through the middle, but I didn't know if that was really going to hit home and give a good look at this room. So I wanted to make sure that the track looped through and got a couple different angles of the room to take it all in, and it's not that, you know, this room is really anything crazy and wild, you know, but there are a lot of angles to take in. and wanted to make sure that that was accounted for. Like you can see here as an example of what I was talking about with the angles. It was a lot of working on the grid, which was good, but it was a lot of working on separate grids, if that makes sense. So I would have to align sort of the anchor piece of each grid I created to make sure it was at least going to be in the ballpark of where it should be to line up the way it needed to, so that when I connected it all together at the end, it wouldn't appear to be this mess of off angles and walls out of alignment. So that took a lot of time with most of this build because nothing was really on a perfect grid in terms of an entire room throughout this whole ride. So it wasn't super intuitive in how to align them cleanly. If there is a better technique that people know of from what I'm using in this footage here, maybe I'm missing something completely obvious, totally likely. But yeah, if there's any other methods that people use to accomplish this sort of thing when it's not a perfect circle of a room or not a hexagon or a perfect square or whatever it is, it could be a bit wonky. Let me know. I'm always down to learn a new trick or two to make things cleaner and more efficient. And I think the other thing that really clicked for me while working on this room was just how much restraint it actually takes to not overbuild something like this, because once you start adding detail, it's really easy, at least for me, it's really easy to just keep going. You know, more props, more textures, more little points of interest everywhere. But with a space like this, especially one that's supposed to, like, you know, have this feel of like ancient ceremonial type vibes, I realized pretty quickly that less was doing more for something like this. Like a big part of that was the lighting for me. I'm not sure how much I actually show in this build, but I did mess with the lighting quite a bit. You know, how much to throw in the room, and at first it was just a bit busy with lights and torches, so I cut back on that. I also had to know, you know, when to move on and realize that this room is complete. It doesn't need any more, because pretty quickly it can just become sort of claustrophobic. In the Forest Temple main room in the game isn't really busy, right? So it's memorable for me because of its structure. Like, there's symmetry, there's verticality, the way everything sort of orbits around like this central elevator. So I kept trying to remind myself that if I nailed those big shapes and proportions, the room would sell itself without me having to dress every square inch of it, which maybe I did dress every square inch of it, I don't know. But that's kind of my approach. And again, that also played into how I approached the lighting. Like I just said, like I didn't want it to feel evenly lit. Too much lighting was going to do that, and I didn't want the room to be readable from every angle. I wanted there to be pockets of shadows and areas where you're not totally sure what's going on, because as the rider, like, uncertainty is part of what makes the room feel larger than it actually is. And from an on-ride perspective, that gave me a little bit of forgiveness too. If something wasn't perfectly aligned, a wall intersection wasn't as clean as I wanted it to be, chances are your eye isn't going to just sit there and dissect it. At least I hope it's not. If it is, that's strange. Your attention is getting pulled toward the center, toward the motion, toward the light, you know. That's something I've really started to appreciate more as I build these types of scenes in this game. It's not that you're always designing like this static diorama. It's like you're designing a sequence of glances, right? Like what you see first, what you catch out of the corner of your eye, what reveals itself as you move, that sort of thing. That's what you're really building. So even though this room is technically the largest in the ride, in terms, again, of a footprint, I didn't want it to feel like you were just dumped into this big open box. I wanted it to feel curated, like you're being guided through it, even if it's subtle. And honestly, this is where deleting the track and starting over in this room ended up being one of probably the better decisions that I made. Because once the room existed as a space first, everything else started to make more sense. In terms of the on-ride experience, because like I said, I am kind of replicating the room from the game, so there weren't so many questions there. It was more of like, how is the ride going to be? It just started to make more sense, where the ride should slow down, where it should turn, where it should give you kind of like a half beat to look around versus push you forward to the next room. At this point in the build, I wasn't really thinking about set pieces just yet. And I say that as you're probably watching the Poe creation in the background right now. You know, I was thinking more about pacing. So making sure the room didn't feel rushed. It also didn't stall totally right out of the gate and kind of disrupt the ride experience. You know, this room is basically like the thesis statement for the whole Forest Temple. Like, if this doesn't land, if it doesn't immediately tell you you're in the Forest Temple itself, then everything that comes after has a much harder job to do, because I did not create one-to-one replications. And throughout the rest of the ride, I did more of like creative liberty adaptations of different rooms from the Forest Temple. So if I don't nail this room, like I feel like those adaptations don't hit as well as they could. So Yeah, anyways, this is just a lot of stepping back, riding through it over and over, tweaking small things here and there, adjusting sight lines, and just asking myself if it felt right. So once I felt like the answer was finally, yeah, this is working, that's when I knew I could start kind of layering in more active elements in the room, like the pose, the stuff that actually brings it to life and adds more depth and everything. And speaking of depth, I don't want to talk too much over this Poe creation, because I think it's sort of the most iconic part of this ride. Again, in the broad daylight, these pieces have some blemishes that you'll for sure notice, but during the on-ride experience, I really think it sells the fact that these are, you know, the 4 main pose that you come across and fight in Ocarina, and the animation trigger sequence I create, I think just further sells that. But yeah, it was not easy to build these little things. The good thing for me is that I did have a first go at this in terms of a build of a Poe, if you will, around when I built that Skull Kid animatronic from the start of the video, same project. So I had an idea of what pieces I could use to pull it off, but I did want to give it another go now that I'm sort of more savvy, if you will, with the pieces and how to manipulate them and combine them to create a specific look. The hardest thing and the most frustrating thing with these types of creations, though, for me is like, I know I have a piece that could fit, but I just can't quite bend it in a way that I want to bend it, because obviously it's like a static piece, and like I want to just reach inside the game and take like this curtain piece and bend it around the head in such a way that fits it, but obviously, yeah, I can't do that. So I kind of have to find this happy medium where I'm covering what I need to cover while making it not look ridiculous, which it can very quickly become that for sure. But yeah, in the end, I'm more than happy with how this little circle of horror came out. Like I said, in my opinion, it's sort of the most iconic part of the ride, I think, and I did want to nail it as close as I could. And truth is, you can only do what you can do within the confines of what Frontier gives us. So, and luckily, like I said, I did have a go at this last year, so I sort of had a starting point with the animation combinations to get the circle sequence kind of set up the right way. So I was able to just plop these new pose to that animation I had already figured out back last year, and then I did tweak it a bit from there once I placed it in the room itself to get a bit more variation of where the pose travel in their circle. Is it perfect? Probably not. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it's cool in my opinion. This part here is not in the game, unless it is, and it's just part of my subconscious memory. I don't think it is though. I just thought it would look cool to have this big like central chandelier-esque thing hang from the ceiling in the middle of the room, and any chance I get to use this stone texture in a build, I'm gonna jump at it, because yeah, I love it. I really just wish we could recolor these pieces. I don't know why we can't, because I would use them for everything. But yeah, this is just, again, a creative liberty I took and thought it added a bit of grandeur to the room. Then finishing up this room, I needed to adjust this corner doorway that leads out to the next scene. It was obviously just too tiny to fit the ride through as it was, so I thought I'd make it sort of like a falling apart type doorway that would get that wider look. Yeah, I find myself using these stone ruin pieces a lot for that type of thing, and really all my projects across the board, just super effective and easy to sort of pull off that look that I was trying to get in a pinch. The twisted hallway, the bane of my existence. It was the one that gave me the most trouble throughout this whole ride, and I wasn't sure how I was gonna really pull it off and make it do what I wanted it to do cleanly. But yeah, another tally for the dark ride darkness thing though, because again, that helps hide any imperfections in the segments within this for sure, or at least the egregious ones. That doesn't mean I want you guys going looking for imperfections, by the way. I feel like I'm saying this quite a few times through this episode. So yeah, don't go looking. It's perfect. Nothing to look for. Everything is just perfect. But this one, it really messed with me. I had a lot of trial and error. I watched Heth Designs, I think is how you pronounce it, in his tutorial that he made on his spinning hallway section of the coaster that he built a while back. So cool, and he pulled it off way better than me for sure. But I was happy to at least have some direction after kind of banging my head against the wall trying to figure out how I was going to pull it off. So that was nice to have. Maybe I'll spend a bit more time with it and try to clean it up a bit later down the road, but again, I think it's good, just not perfect, despite what I sarcastically just said a second ago. My biggest challenge was that I wanted it to be able to stay twisted and pause there as a twisted hallway until the ride got through it, you know, because that's kind of what it does in game. Link is running through the twisted hallway as a twisted hallway, and maybe that's possible with some further trial and error with like sequences and stuff, but I just couldn't get there with this one. That's why I might try to go back at some point and see if I can just do some further testing and figure it out. But for now, it's sort of twists and then twist all the way back while you're riding through. But the point's there, and I think it pulls it off well enough for the ride. And then in terms of like look and theming to this, there isn't a ton to go off of from the game. It's just sort of a nondescript hallway outside of the ghostly twisting situation. So all the time spent on this section really was just figuring out how to blend the twisting segments well enough to make it as seamless as possible when the trigger goes. One big thing I found I needed to fix was here. I'm making the wall pieces in more of an angle to kind of create a more circular shape. It helped with the cleaner rotation of the segments, and that's a tip I got from the video I just mentioned, Heath Designs. And then also adding some arch pieces to help hide those seams where each segment is separated from. But yeah, you'll have to stick around for the POV at the end to check out the final look of this hallway in all its glory. And no skipping ahead, no cheats, you stay where you are. While we're on the topic of triggers and animations and sequencing and whatnot, let's throw in a few of the animatronic creations that are scattered throughout the ride. And these are the types of things that made this video a bit more delayed than I would have hoped, but I had to have some animatronics in this, otherwise what's the point of having a dark ride, right? But a little outside my wheelhouse for sure. I find I'm stronger at creating buildings and structures and theming those up, but these are so fun to make, and they're rewarding as hell when you get them close to how you're imagining. So I love doing it. It's just for sure a puzzle to get the animations acting together in the right way to be able to have the piece you're building do what you want it to do in the end. A big help with this in figuring out a starting point to create this motion with the Deku Baba. And I feel ridiculous saying that word combination, Deku Baba. A big help though was a YouTuber by the name of Red Mender. He made this sick steampunk train with like a mechanical horse pulling the train. And the way he had the horse's legs animated was just something I haven't really seen yet in that way. And that came up in my algorithm one day while I was in the middle of working on this ride. And I immediately thought this sort of trick would be perfect for the Deku Baba animation. So definitely go watch that video. Super cool build and really cool animation sequence that he used. And here I am creating the floating skull head that I'm fairly certain are called, they're called bubbles in Zelda games. I could be wrong, but I'm usually not. This one I thought would be cool because definitely you come across a few of these throughout the Forest Temple in Ocarina. And it could be a really cool moving piece to add to the ride, so I figured why not. And then the last animatronic I will show, but not the last animation or animatronic in the ride, mind you. I needed wall masters in the ride somewhere too, and it was a perfect fit for the room like directly after that twisted hallway, because I'm pretty sure in game that's the room that has some of the wall masters in it, you know, the one immediately outside that twisted hallway. And at first I toyed with the idea of creating like an original hand monster to animate, but I figured there's literally a hand piece in this game with the wrist like in an upward position like it should be to replicate a wall master. So why am I going to try and make this janky hand when I already have one in the game for me, right? All right, back to the individual rooms that make up this dark ride. I feel like you absolutely need a Poe painting situation in anything trying to play the part of a forest temple from Ocarina of Time. It's such a big mechanic in that game, in that temple. And for me, at least, it's a super memorable part of the temple for sure. Like it needed to be in here in some way for me. So, and with these dark rides, you can't necessarily like simulate going up a flight of stairs per se, like you would in the game to see those paintings. You can kind of fake it, but not really, because you're limited to what I think is a 12-degree incline or decline in track pieces. So it would sort of be hard to pull that off without using a ton of real estate, which I already used with this ride, and I didn't want to make the footprint any bigger than it was. So I needed a way to sort of represent that mechanic, those hallways, stairways in general from the game. So decided for a sort of perspective trick instead of having the ride go up a stairwell or down a stairwell. And then I combined that like inspired room with another inspired element from the Forest Temple, and that's the eye switch. I mean, obviously it's in different temples and throughout Zelda games, but this particular room is directly preceding the twisted hallway section. In an Ocarina, you have to shoot the eye switch to trigger that hallway, right? And I'm making almost all of these references off of memory, by the way, so I really hope my memory isn't just spewing out garbage and wrong facts, but I'm pretty certain you shoot the eye switch to activate that twisted hallway in the game. So I thought it could be cool to have that sort of mechanic represented at this point to properly separate this room from the twisted hallway. And I was super proud of this idea too, and the way I kind of pulled it off. What I did was I used this invisibility blueprint from the workshop. I did not come up with this genius apparatus, by the way. I think it was actually the famous Taggy who did, so kudos to him once again. He's amazing at what he does. But I used it to sort of like simulate an arrow being shot into the eye switch, the eye being closed, and then that opens this door, and presumably the idea is it activates the twisted hallway in that next section. I think I pulled it off pretty nicely thanks to this invisibility blueprint, which I end up using a couple times throughout the ride. It's a super useful tool, and it is on the workshop, like I said, so you can use it for yourselves and test it out. And what I did to kind of utilize this to create this effect was I just created two versions of the eye switch, one open and one shut. So at the time the ride triggers the event to happen, that's kind of tied to this invisibility apparatus, that's triggered, which makes the open eye version disappear and shows the shut version behind it. At that same moment, I have another trick where I created an arrow set piece that is constantly invisible using that same sort of apparatus. At the time of the trigger, the arrow apparatus turns off, so the arrow appears at the same time the eye switch is shutting. Throw in an arrow sound effect from the Ocarina game, and voila, you kind of have this really cool mechanic for your ride. I hope that makes sense too. I'm not sure if I explained that effectively, but hopefully you understood. And if you don't, watch the POV because you will see how it works. This room is another spot that I had to adjust the track and how it weaved around the room because, again, like the elevator room previously, I wanted to have a bit more of a roundabout path through the room and be able to take in more and allow more kind of glances and elements to play a part in selling it. So I just adjusted the track to take a larger, wider corner so that, you know, the riders could take it all in and also give it more of a runway for that eye switch mechanic that I created too. And this idea of giving the room more time to breathe was something that I really learned making this ride, and how important that can be with especially a dark ride creation, because you're not necessarily just designing where the track's going, you're more designing where people will be looking. So if you rush through a space too quickly, even really cool set pieces are gonna sort of feel invisible. So widening out that turn, playing with the yaw controls, which is a whole other issue I came across, by the way. But yeah, letting the ride take more of like a patient approach and path through the room gave everything a chance to register. At least that was my hope with that. But yeah, man, those yaw controls were something else. I could not figure out why when I was adjusting one specific track piece, it would alter all of the other track pieces around it and before it and after it. So I would, like, for example, try to adjust the yaw rotation in this room and it would affect the positioning and rotation of the ride in like 2 rooms previous or 2 rooms after. So that was pretty frustrating until I just figured out it was a simple fix. I just had to set the other track pieces to 0 rotation first. That locks them in there, and then I can go about kind of adjusting the rotation throughout on like individual pieces more effectively. So if you're struggling with that, if you come across that issue, that's the solution. But maybe I'm the only one who's come across that. I don't know. I couldn't find any like Reddit threads or forum posts on like troubles with that. So maybe I'm the only one. But if you are like me and you struggle figuring out why it's doing that, you are not alone. And that's how you fix it. Then this gold sculptula was a nice touch, I think, around the ride, using the sound effect from Ocarina 2 to pair with the animation sequence that I used for it. This is a blueprint that I had created, again, back in that previous project, so I don't have the footage for that, but I was happy how it came out back then and really didn't see a reason to change it this time around. I think it was as good as it's gonna get with the pieces that we have in the game. So, and with those the Poe in the painting effect thing, if you're really familiar with that kind of mechanic in the game, I do include that in the final ride POV, but I don't have footage of me doing it. It was just done in Adobe, some effects in there, some pretty simple, but again, we'll have to wait until the ride POV to see that. For this next room, I'd like to give a shout out to Jeff here. He commented on my last video with some ideas for rooms to incorporate in the ride, and I had completely spaced on the Checkerboard Room. So when I saw him mention that, I had to do it. Such a cool room and for sure an iconic part of the temple. I don't know how I forgot it. I love seeing those ideas too, so if you've got any, leave them in the comments. I'll try to incorporate them into the park at some point, whether it's an addition to what we've already done or something that hasn't been done to this point. Either way, I'm certainly open to hearing other ideas because there are so many cool elements in Zelda games to make use of in a theme park, and I obviously forget some of them. So thanks again, Jeff, for that idea. Love it. I wanted to have this floor switch simulate activating the ceiling dropping down on the rider, and then I had to have these spike slider things in here too, talking about iconic, that sound effect that goes along with these things are just like ingrained into my brain. Made sense to have these in here too. All right, this part, not so much a room as it is more of like a courtyard. Not sure if this resonates with as many people as maybe it does with me in my childhood, but I loved this part of the temple back in the day, and it made sense to sort of end the ride on this one. Up to this point, almost every room in the ride is pretty confined, tight spaces, heavy theming, a lot of reliance on like triggers and sequences and whatnot, controlled sight lines, that sort of thing. So I knew I wanted a spot in the ride that would give the ride and the rider a bit of a breather and sort of seem like a perfect room to end on. So yeah, it's still very much part of the Forest Temple experience, obviously, but it's not meant to feel like you're inside the temple itself like the other rooms are. It's more like this ending space, like you've exited the temple, but also the temple is still there and in looming sort of deal. The open air feeling was really intentional too. I didn't want to cap this room with a ceiling and have like artificial daylight lighting, although I guess everything in this game is artificial because it's a game, but you know what I mean. So I utilized the canopy sort of ceiling and lighting technique again, that same one that I used with the Deku Tree restaurant that I mentioned, and then that I showed in the Skull Kid section earlier in the ride. I really like that approach because it kind of gives you more believable daylight filtering in, again, without cluttering the space with trees or forcing it to feel more enclosed. You know, you get that filtered light like you're underneath the forest canopy, which immediately changes the mood compared to interior rooms, I think. And you're not meant to stop and analyze what's happening in this segment of the ride too, so don't do it. Just kidding. It's more of an open space to take in and feel, I guess. There are triggers here I put in at some point. The Deku Baba animatronics. I still can't say that without laughing. They end up in this room, but they're more like punctuation marks at the end of the ride rather than like a focus of this area. And from a track standpoint, wanted this again to feel more smooth and relaxed, just kind of meandering through this courtyard, nothing like forcing your attention at a certain corner or a certain set piece or whatever. Just enjoy the view and get ready to get back in line and ride the ride again. And then going sort of backwards here in the ride, apologies, these rooms that I'm showing aren't in really any specific order in terms of the on-ride experience and where they show up on the ride. It's more just how I sequence starting each build of each room. But anyway, this is the upside down room, the Wallmaster room that comes directly after the twisted hallway. And the whole idea was that the hallway didn't just twist for twisting's sake, it actually kind of flipped the world on you, or at least this particular room. Everything in this space is meant to just feel off. The blocks are on the ceiling, upside down windows, the door you can't reach because it's upside down and on the ceiling, basically. I don't know. So hoping that these details trigger your brain to immediately recognize them as like familiar aspects of a room, but not at all where they should be, you know? It's supposed to kind of disorient in that way. And then also the wall masters, of course, are needed in this space. They're really the focal point of the room, whereas the upside down factor is more the vibe of the room, I guess. In Ocarina, these wall masters were stressful to hear lurking around before you actually saw them, so I needed to have that kind of vibe in here in some point, so this made sense to do it here. And again, the lighting, like I keep saying, was a big factor. Keeping things dim, letting shadows hide parts of the ceilings or parts of the room in general, not really fully revealing it all clearly. That was the goal with this, to keep it kind of mysterious and also hide the imperfections, which I don't really think there were in this room, but that's kind of consistent across the board there. And yeah, it's a super short transition room that takes you from that twisted hallway down to the checkerboard room, so gets the job done hopefully in a short spurt of time within the ride. Alright, and the last room of the actual ride experience that I will show here before we get to the queue and some of those extra things, and then onto the POV, of course. The Phantom Ganon room, because you can't have the Forest Temple without the boss fight somehow represented, right? If you played Ocarina, this room has to be burned into your memory. The paintings, the anticipation of fighting Ganon, such a specific like sort of feel, right? So going into this, my main goal wasn't to recreate the boss fight itself, obviously, because that would be really hard to do in this game, but to recreate more of like the feeling of being in that room. It's really the only room I changed up the lighting too, in terms of, you know, the indoor spaces anyway, because I seem to remember this room being sort of like a purplish color, again, based off of my memory, which could be wrong. It just kind of lived in my brain as like this purple type of tint to everything. This is one of the main rooms I struggled with in terms of layout though, along with the elevator room. And really it's the one that got me nervous when I realized I wasn't able to figure out the yaw control thing towards the beginning of building the tracks, because it relies on sort of like a pause moment in a rotation to get the full effect of the room with the different paintings and whatnot. But outside of that, like the dimensions and layout in general was tough to kind of nail down. I don't think it comes across as wonky during the ride at all, so that's fine in that way. But some of these top-down views, you can sort of see it's not super symmetrical, or at least not as perfectly symmetrical as I would have liked to make things easier on me. And that again plays into the whole difficulty of making that custom roof for the show building. And now I will show you guys the boarding station and the queue design, but I wanted more to discuss like what we should go to next if people are into that idea of giving their thoughts. Because I see a couple different paths that I could take with this, but curious if anyone has any preferences or ideas, like in terms of things on my list to build in this park. I still want to make a big Zoro's Domain area for sure, like that's a necessity. I'm definitely going to be doing that. Whether I make that a water park portion of the theme park, I'm not sure about that. I've yet to use the water park tools in this game at all, so I'm sort of nervous if I go that route about how that would come out. And I think I'm apt more to stick to this sort of thing we've been doing so far for Zora's Domain, but definitely thinking about a water park. I just haven't decided yet. The other options are to finish up like this Lost Woods area with a couple flat ride theming projects and vendor building stalls, that sort of thing, to fill in the empty spaces that we still have. Another option would be to go back to Goron City and finish that area up. We haven't been back there since the Goron Mine Coaster, so that's an option. Definitely lots to do there. And then outside of that, I have ideas, like I said, Zora's Domain, but nothing is set in stone in terms of like which angles to go after next, and really which games to go after next, right? So like to this point, I've stuck pretty closely to Ocarina throughout the park, because like I've said in the past, it's my most central gaming memory I have as a child. But I've played all the Zelda games, and they all kind of have a place in my heart, except for somehow I never did play Twilight Princess. I don't know how that happened, but I never really played that, so I wouldn't have much to draw from there. But anything else is fair game. But yeah, anyway, I was curious if anyone had any ideas or preferences about this. Maybe not, but I figured I'd throw it out there regardless. Those are some of the things I've thought about in terms of next steps and where to go after this one. What are people thinking? Stick with Ocarina, start a brand new area, finish some touch-up parts of existing areas, explore an entire new Zelda game to represent in the park. If you're feeling something in particular, let me know. And with that being said, thank you to anyone who has made it through this long marathon video. I really do appreciate it. You are amazing, and thank you in advance for anyone leaving comments and engaging with the content the last few episodes. I really do appreciate that. So yeah, with that being said, leave a like, subscribe to follow the park's progress, leave suggestions in the comments, your thoughts, positive or negative. I'm open to criticism and constructive feedback as well. I'll leave it with the rest of this time lapse of the queue and boarding station. I dress up the ride car train thing. I think that ended up looking really cool, so look for that. And then yeah, hope you guys like the ride, enjoy the POV, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.